Hello everybody and welcome to my book blog, and welcome indeed to sunny Spain, because as you can quite probably tell from the very spectacular palm tree behind me, I am not in London. No, I am on my vacation, and so for the next few book vlogs you're actually going to see some blue sky behind me rather than a dark bookcase or indeed my back garden. So the first book that I've been reading on holiday is this. It is Pope Francis' new book. It's not really a biography, it's certainly not an autobiography. We'll come into what it is, but it is A Future of Faith, The Path of Change. Now this is a book that's based on a series of interviews that Pope Francis has done with the French intellectual, by his own description, Dominique Wolton, looking at the future of the Catholic Church and how the new Pope sees his position as a force of change both within the Catholic Church and within the wider global community. You will also, however, notice I'm using my iPhone. Please forgive me. Not only have the publishers sent me all the books by PDF for my summer vacation rather than actual physical copies to hold, but also it means I can't hold up my iPad because I can't film on my iPhone because the camera is broken. I'm so sorry. Please forgive me. Technical nightmare. Never have a smash screen. It's a nightmare. But anyway, enough about the technical issues. Let's get on with the book. Now I'm going to put this review into three sections. One, an overview of the book. Second, what is right with it, and third, the challenges. And the reason why I'm doing that is because, one, it gives it a bit of structure, but also I did not actually initially pick this book to read because I'm not a Catholic at all, though my mum was born a Catholic. My parents are C of E, Church of England, and though I am christened, I am not a regular churchgoer, and I certainly have my issues with God and with organised religion. However, I was approached by the publishers with a PDF asking me to read and review this. And the reason why they said this is because they're really proud of the book and they want it to get to an audience that wouldn't normally read this type of book or listen to Pope Francis's teachings or speeches, to get their input. Because obviously if this is a book about the future of faith and a path of change, they think it's interesting to hear about people who are initially skeptical or even outright hostile, to see if this book can perhaps change their views, make them more sympathetic, their reactions, and so on. And of course this book is going to be an extremely popular book anyway and a bestseller, so I think they just want to get an idea on the breadth of reception. So let's get on with the structure of the book. This book is a series of interviews. There were about 12 interviews that Dominique Wolton conducted with the Pope over about the course of a year. Now, the two did have an initial sort of conversation about what kind of subjects they were going to talk about, but it's quite clear that nothing is particularly off the table. I wouldn't, however, say this is a series of political head-to-heads. This feels more like a series of magazine interviews, a kind of at home with the Pope, which is all kind of, you can imagine it in a luxury glossy magazine with the Pope sort of sitting, which is a bit mean because obviously Pope Francis isn't that kind of guy. But what I mean is that this is a sympathetic interview. This is an opportunity for him to talk about certain issues with some gentle prodding on areas of contention. So what I like about the book is I actually think that style works. This is a very accessible read. Not only do you have the interviews, which are sort of broken down into a series of subsections on theme and ideas, but they're also supported by a couple of excerpts from the Pope's speeches, which give more depth and understanding to his particular viewpoint. And that works well. This makes this very easy to read. I think the books generally that are written by popes can get very deep into theology, and it can make them very inaccessible, and not even regular churchgoers even want to read them. So this is far more modern, far more contemporary, and is a risk, but I think for a modern, more secular audience, I think that works well. So I like the style. Perhaps I wouldn't have picked Dominique Wolton as an interviewer. He does like the sound of his own voice, and he does sort of have a few bits where he cuts the Pope up. For example, the Pope is about to start talking about Adolf Hitler, and Dominique Wolton sort of cuts in, and suddenly we go off again. You think, ooh, I really want to know what Pope Francis thought of Adolf Hitler. But I think the style works well. So what also I like about it is the fact that the Pope does take on some pretty challenging issues. So he does answer that an enormously immortal question: why does God let bad things happen to good people? Where was God in Auschwitz? And his answers to that is actually very interesting and very challenging. I think it is quite clear from his own words that Pope Francis is a passionate about the church being the church for the poor. He is passionate about the Catholic Church acting as a bridge between communities and between religions. He is passionate about apologising for the church's sins, of which there are many. And he is certainly passionate about being what he sees a force for change, hence the title of the book. So he very much sees himself as trying to set the path for the future, though he won't be drawn on whether he thinks he necessarily will succeed on that, which is quite interesting. So all things good. So what I find challenging about the book? Fundamentally, I mean, you have to sort of be Christian or have an interest in Christian faith or be raised in a relatively Christian society in order to get this book. Because even though it might not be overly into heavily theological arguments, there's certainly a lot of references to the gospel, certainly a lot of references to stories in the Bible, certainly a lot of references to various Vatican councils, which you can kind of pick up through the footnotes about what they meant. So certainly this is a book about Catholicism. Also, what the challenge is with this book is it will not change your opinion on the Pope or the Catholic Church. Whatever prejudice or opinion you already hold about Pope Francis, he will not change your viewpoint here, because the criticisms people have of the Catholic Church and the criticisms people have still of Pope Francis will remain true after this. So he is not a feminist. He is very sexist. He is extremely critical of abortion. And I am filming this vlog the day after the vote in Argentina. Pope Francis is, of course, from Argentina. He was born there, and apparently it is clear now that he was very active in contacting members of the Argentine Congress and Parliament and persuading them to vote against a law that would legalize abortion for women in Argentina. And he is very explicit that abortion is a sin, and it is a sin on the woman, and that it is a sin that women must apologize for. That's very hard for me to read as a modern woman, as a feminist, and for all the talk about Pope Francis being a bridge and for listening, I just think you ain't listening to women, are you? Similarly, his views on homosexuality, gay couples and gay marriages are just anachronistic, and there are dangerous points where he conflates child rape with the filth of pornography and homosexuality, and you just think the fact that you can put that all in one sentence is worrying. There's a world of difference between just the fact that his brain links that is extremely concerning, and doesn't offer much hope for change. He does reaffirm often throughout the book that he doesn't see below the belt, as he terms it, sin as high on his list, but then he keeps going back to it, so it's not quite that believable. He also has very strong views on evangelism, which is quite common for most religions, but there's a lot of concern about the role of missionaries, seeing them as racist, seeing them as particularly conceited and obviously part of empire building. And the fact that he doesn't see that is quite tricky. So like I say, what you already think of him is not going to be challenged by what he says. There is no doubt that he is a man that is full of love and compassion for what he does. But that compassion seems to stop when it comes to certain communities and certain underrepresented groups and certain groups that are discriminated against. However, he does talk openly about his concern around bishops in the Catholic Church, and that is of course important, though he seems to add caveats around the series of sexual abuse. He sort of said, only 4% of paedophiles in the world today are Catholic priests, and you sort of think, that's probably not the argument you should go for. And then he's sort of going, and half of paedophiles are adults who were raped as children themselves, and you sort of think, this is the wrong argument. So there are concerns, and in fact, like I come back to on the conversational style in the interviews, he seems to sort of worm his way into these dead ends because perhaps he didn't think them through, and sort of the seduction of conversation and a perceived informality in his conversations with Dominique Wolton. He is perhaps off his guard more, which is of course interesting. There are some subjects, however, that I wish were tackled in the book. So the Pope has been very active in criticising the mafia, which is a huge deal, and when popes have tried that before, that hasn't ended well. So I'm surprised that topic didn't come up. And I also would have liked to hear him talk more about the power structures of the Catholic Church, because it remains interesting to me that the Pope is always the person, always the man, that climbs to the very top of one of the most powerful, insidious power structures in the world. The Catholic Church is obsessed with power, obsessed with hierarchy, and obsessed with their privilege. And it's interesting that someone can climb to the top of that pyramid and still be humble and still want to change the church for the benefit of the poor. You sort of think you have to navigate some choppy waters to get to where you are, and how did that not rub off on you? So it'd be interesting if you talked more about the power structures of the Catholic Church, but no book can be everything to everyone. And like I said, this is a very interesting conversation with the Pope about things that he sees the Catholic Church need to change if they're to continue to be, or if they are to be a force for positivity and good in the world. However, what I wanted to say about this book in a very long way is this book won't change your mind on whether you think the Pope and the Catholic Church can be a force for good. Is that disappointing? I don't know. However, I am glad I read this, and I'm glad the publishers gave me the opportunity to read this, because I did find myself learning a lot about humility, and I did find some personal takeaways for me on giving other people space and being a better person. However, there is no chance in hell of this making me a Catholic. Okay, so that is Pope Francis' A Future of Faith with Dominique Wolton, being published this month, being translated in English this month. So if you fancy a good challenge and an insight into the new Pope, this will be your read. Don't expect to come out though being completely converted.